1. Honestly, I've been very stressed lately. It's been a crazy few weeks, and I feel like it should be in this sub so I can cope with it. I am 19 years old, and I have been a Boy Scout all my life. I recently turned 19, so I cannot unfortunately be a Scout anymore. I became an Eagle Scout at a relatively young age. 17. Me and a few of my friends have been in the troop since we were 11. We went through the rankings together, and all our experiences revolved around each other. We grew up in a rural area in New Jersey, so we loved the outdoors. Camping, hunting, and fishing was our shit. One of my friends, Luke, asked me and my other friends, Mark, Nick, and Owen, if we wanted to go out to a hunting reserve in Pennsylvania. His uncle owned about 8 acres of woodlands with streams and lakes. He invited us for a 4-day-long camping and various other activities trip. Since we were all into that stuff, it was all set. We drove out on a Thursday night, and it took about an hour and a half to get there. Once we got there, we went to a wooden cabin that Luke's uncle was letting him borrow. He unlocked it, and I have to say it was nice. It had a working toilet, stove, lights, and some other goodies. It wasn't the full outdoor and camping experience, but it was close. We brought a cooler with some drinks, and we were set. It was nice. It was like it used to be, us sitting around a fire and just talking. Around 12:30 at night, we went to bed. Luke woke us up around 6 to go fishing at the lake. We grabbed our gear and went out to the lake. It was a cold morning, but quite pretty. The sun was beginning to rise and the sky was turning blue. With about 5 more minutes of walking, we were there. We spread out a bit, but I was with Nick, relaxing on the grass. I picked up my rod and went out for a few casts. We were all about 15 yards apart. The lake was very large, so you can barely see the other side. I was casting and Nick muttered, "What the fuck?" I turned around and asked him what was up. He pointed diagonally across the lake to a faint figure standing. It looked tall, but I couldn't really make out anything else. I looked back at Nick and called Luke, Mark, and Owen. We showed them, and it just kept standing there. We walked slowly away and back to the cabin. We mostly forgot about it, playing cards and listening to music. It was about 1:30 p.m. and we were hungry. We went out back to a little charcoal grill, and we put some burger patties that we brought on the grill. We fired it up, and Owen, being the best cook, made them. The rest of us were just looking around and hanging out, when we heard some crunchies from the woods surrounding the cabin. We stopped talking, and looked over at the tree line. About 10 yards away, we saw a person who was trying to hide behind a tree. Like I noticed before, he was tall, very tall, probably around 6'8". We were scared shitless, and we lost it when we saw a head turn around from the tree. It was pale and had black, messy hair. It had a solemn expression on its face. It looked like a mental patient. It was wearing very baggy and worn clothes. Luke ran back into the cabin, grabbed his Uncle Remington 1700 hunting rifle, and fired a shot in the air. He yelled, "Get the hell out, now!" We heard leaves crunching as he ran away. By then, we all wanted to get the hell out of there. Luke wanted us to give it one more chance, so, being good friends, we told him he was crazy. He was pretty much begging, so we said yes. We went into the woods for some hunting, and just to observe nature. We figured it would be good to get a break from the cabin. Maybe 2 hours later, we headed back to the cabin. When we were there, the cabin door was wide open. Luke stuttered and said, "You saw me lock it, right?" We said yes, as he had made a big deal about it to make sure we were safe. We were armed, so we raised our weapons and walked in. Inside, the place was ransacked. Most of the food and beer was gone, a few personal items weren't there, and there was a note on Luke's bed. It only had 4 words on it. It said his uncle's full name and Luke's. That was it. We grabbed our shit, hopped back into the car, and drove the fuck out of there. The most off-putting part about it was how the person knew Luke's name along with his uncle's. I'm in fear he knows Owen, Mark's, Nick's, and my name. I really hope nothing ever happens to me. I hope I never meet that freak. Update 11/20/17. Hey, thanks for all the advice for what to do to try and catch him. Luke's uncle has changed the locks. The police are investigating the cabin for fingerprints or evidence for who could have done it. I haven't had any other information from Luke except from that so far. 2. My story happened in 2010, probably around May. I live in North Carolina, and the weather that time of year is great for outdoors because during most of the summer months the humidity can make this place feel like hell. So one weekday afternoon, my now ex-husband and I took our then almost 1-year-old son to a nearby state park that was fairly small with lots of trails through woods on cliffs overlooking a river. We would go there occasionally for hiking, but knew well enough that our 1-year-old couldn't handle walking the trails, so we planned to split up. We would take turns jogging the shorter but harder trail alone, while the other parent took our son through the small museum and surrounding area at the park. My husband went jogging first, while I hung out with our son. No problem at all. He comes back, and I leave them in the museum and start my jog. I make a few laps since the trail is just a circle that isn't that long, and I decide to head back. As I'm starting towards the trail in the woods that leads to the museum, my husband calls my cell, which was odd, because we didn't talk on the phone much, especially when I'm at most a few minutes walk from him. I answer and he has a strange worried tone and just says, "Are you okay?" I tell him I am, but ask why. He just says, "Could you go ahead and start back this way, please? I'll explain when you get here." I tell him I'm already walking that way and we hang up. I mentioned that this happened on a weekday because had it been a weekend, there would have been other people around, I'm sure. However, on this random weekday, the park was totally empty except for my family. That's what I thought, until this point anyway. I'm walking down the trail leading to the museum and see a man walking towards me. That isn't odd. It's a nice day, and he's just doing exactly what I'm doing. But as he gets closer, his facial expression just seems creepy and off. The trail is surrounded by woods, thick enough that if two people are passing each other, you would have to move to the side to get by. So as I'm nearing this guy I'm about to have to walk beside, he's not moving out of the center of the trail. I don't stop walking, and neither does he. But when he's about 4 feet in front of me, he proceeds to jump a bit towards me, spreading his arms out as if he will grab me, and making it clear I cannot get around him on this trail. Of course I stop, and I believe my words were, "What the fuck?" I don't know why I didn't run the other way. Maybe I froze. Or maybe I realized that running back into the woods with this guy possibly chasing me could end worse than whatever was happening right now. He then says the least assuring thing ever. I'm not gonna hurt you." Still standing feet in front of me with arms outstretched so that I cannot get around him. That means you're definitely thinking about hurting me, in my eyes. So he and I are at a standoff for probably 2 seconds when I remember I have pepper spray in my shorts. I pull it out and point it in his direction and say, "I know you're not. My husband, did you see him? He's in the museum and I'm supposed to be there right now. I just wanted the guy to know that I wasn't alone, so someone would be looking for me soon." At this point the guy moves over and lets me pass by. He heads into the woods, while I sprint towards my husband and son, who are now standing outside the museum. I explain what just happened, and my husband is so upset, because that guy is the reason he had just called me to ask me to come back. He said the guy just gave him an uncomfortable vibe. Enough so that when the guy left the museum, my husband called because he didn't want me in the woods alone with that guy. We head towards the parking lot, and see that aside from our car, the only other vehicle is a white truck that must belong to Creepy Guy. We are getting into our car to leave, when creepy guy is coming out of the woods, so we watch him just get into his truck and drive away. This freaked me out even more because this man couldn't have been at the park for more than 5 minutes total. He parked, walked into and out of the museum, then down a trail for at most 2 to 3 minutes. Why? To this day, I think he was looking for someone alone to do I don't know what with. We weren't smart enough or quick enough to get a license plate number in case something did happen to someone because of this guy. And hopefully nothing ever did. But I was so very thankful for my husband and pepper spray that day. 3. I started working on a rose farm around 4 years ago. My brother turned me on to an opening, and my aunt Lily and I were hired on the spot given our different backgrounds in horticulture. It was harder work than I had anticipated, as we not only had to tend to the roses in the greenhouse, but also had to deal with the monster plants out in a huge garden. There was no air conditioning, and when the temperatures climbed in the summer months, we found shade wherever possible. There were plenty of trees and storage buildings, and some of the climbing roses had grown so dense that during breaks we could just sometimes chill along the pathway they had grown over. We set our own hours, and our boss, a terrible dragon of a woman, was blessedly rarely there to breathe down our necks. From here on out, we will call her Boss Dragon. My brother was fired after being accused of breaking into her house. He hadn't. No one had, we later learned. She was just batshit bonkers. But my aunt and I stayed on until family obligations kept her home more often than not. There was a revolving door of workers who came and went, usually due to how unpleasant our boss was, but the one constant was Tommy. Tommy was an older man who was nice enough, if not a bit off. He had worked there for 9 years at that point. Toward the end of the first year, he and I were the only ones working the farm, and he seemed pretty harmless, if not a bit off-putting. Our conversations during our breaks were innocent and innocuous enough. I learned that he had moved from West Virginia some years earlier, with his elderly mother. But he never told me why his family up there never talked to him, and I never asked. I'm a private person, and I figured it wasn't my business. But as time went by, things began steering straight into Creepy Town. Tommy would ask about my boyfriend, ask weird shit like if we ever kissed, if we shared a bed together, if we were getting married. Each time I had told him that I didn't think those were appropriate things to ask a co-worker, and it seemed like that was that. Now Tommy had always a bit of a staring problem. I thought it was due to bad socialization, but it was really fucking weird. The staring became worse, somehow when he started working on the opposite side of the property. Sometimes I would catch him crouched beneath a large bush or beneath a tree, just watching me work. If I saw him beneath a shade tree or beneath the climbers, I would go and sit in my car and have my break there. Tommy was also incredibly quiet when he moved. Sometimes I would stand up to find him right behind me. I have horribly bad anxiety, and this did not bode well. It got so bad that I told him straight up to stop, or I would clock him. I asked Boss Dragon about him one day during one of her upswings, but she confided in me that while he had been working there for years, she didn't know very much about him. She assured me, however, that he wouldn't harm a fly. Boss Dragon had a penchant for lying her ass off. The first summer turned to fall, and when winter hit, the job ended. I started back the next year, happy to be working outside. I had almost completely forgotten about Tommy, but there he was, working away. I spoke to him as little as possible, and when we had a new hire, I always made sure to stick around them, even if their stay was only temporary. During Lily's sporadic workdays, I would stay glued to her hip. But there were still days, too many, where I was alone with Tommy. One day while weeding around a rosebush, I stepped into a nest of yellow jackets. I went straight to Boss Dragon's house where her now ex-husband, Steve, a dearly sweet man who I now consider one of my best friends, gave me Benadryl. watched me to make sure I wasn't allergic with EpiPen in hand, and offered me a place to sleep it off in their guest room. When I decided to go home, Boss Dragon had Tommy follow me in the work truck in case something happened. I wish I had put my foot down and said no, but if you've ever angered a bunch of yellow jackets, you know how much their stings hurt. I wanted to get home before the Benadryl kicked in and made me go to sleep. I didn't realize that gave Tommy the perfect opportunity to know where I lived. How he learned about where my aunt lived, however, is still a mystery. Now, I visited Lily a lot since she lived maybe 5 minutes from me. Next to her was a public park where people were always coming and going. One day I get a call, saying that Tommy had been standing on the path that led into the park. And when she asked him what he was doing, he told her that he knew I visited often and he had hoped to see me. My aunt is a bit of a badass, and told him to stop being creepy and go away. It was public property, however, and Tommy could do whatever he wanted. What made it extra creepy is that Tommy didn't drive. That the work truck was allowed to even leave the property was a rarity, and Tommy, I learned later, had lost his license year before because of a DWI. So he had ridden his bike from his trailer near the Rose Farm, nearly 20 miles to park next to Lily's house. I told Boss Dragon and she shrugged it off, but revealed to me that he often rode into my town and had even been in my sub-development, because he had told her that one day I wasn't at home. He said I was always either at home or at my aunt's. It slowly dawned on me what was happening. He was stalking me. Boss Dragon said she would handle it, even gave me a hug. She didn't do anything though, and I will never forgive her for that. Very little scares me. I'm a tomboy who grew up in the country. Tommy, though smallish and in his 50s, scared me. I would see him in town, or at the intersection by my housing development. I live sticks adjacent. Just standing and staring as if he were waiting. I quit my job soon after, and thought that was that. I grew really paranoid. I would sit on my front stoop with a baseball bat for hours on end, just waiting for him to come up, but he never did. He did most of his stalking when he knew I wouldn't see him. He was sneaky. That scared me the most. Soon after I quit, one of my wheels came loose from my car. I'm lucky that I work excellent in a crisis, because if I had not pulled over, the tire would have liberated itself from my back bumper where it was stuck. And I don't even want to know what would have happened. He continued stalking the park, continued stalking my neighborhood. I gave my neighbors a heads up. Lily grew increasingly tired of coming out in her yard, only to see him standing in the park's path, staring with a cigarette perched between his lips. Waiting. Driving past the Rose Farm one day, she saw Tommy standing by the old farm truck. Lily stopped, threw her car into reverse, and swerved into the parking lot. She got out of the car and started asking him questions which he would not answer. She became so mad, my little spitfire of an aunt, that she kicked the side of the truck hard enough to dent it, to keep from kicking him. That was enough to get him to answer her next question. She asked him if he really believed that he and I were in a relationship. He said yes. I had never done anything to lead this man on. Against her better judgment, she threatened him, but honestly, I love her for that. It bought me a few weeks of peace. I returned to the Rose Farm with my aunt and boyfriend to get our things eventually. Coolers and tools that we used because Boss Dragon was too cheap to buy the tools required for the job. Tommy was walking along the road, staring, and when my aunt told him to keep walking, he crossed the street and crouched down in the trees and just kept staring and smoking his cigarette. Lily called the cops. The officer came, a super nice young man, and his presence sent Tommy running off through the woods. I told him what was up, and he told me that if he tried anything to get a restraining order. Then he went to speak with Tommy at his trailer. After that, the phone calls began. I don't know how he got my number. To this day, I wonder if Boss Dragon gave it to him. At first I would tell him to fuck off, and he would say creepy shit like how he would never hurt me. So I started to ignore him. He texted me things about how much he loved me, grew irate when I didn't answer. He told me to erase the texts from my phone. He wouldn't stop, and ignoring him just seemed to push him further. He kept it up until I blocked him, but he continued his daily rides into town and to the park by my aunt's house. We're also pretty sure that he listened to lug nuts on my car. So was the cop we talked to, and the judge, but without evidence, there was nothing we could do. That was the last straw for my boyfriend, Tim. Tim, a very sweet and level-headed man, confronted him next. The car had barely stopped when he jumped out of it, and asked him what his deal was. Again, Tommy was asked if he thought I was his girlfriend. Again, he said yes, even after I had made it extremely clear that I wasn't. That was the confrontation that caused Tommy to drop his simpering idiot act. It's hard to describe. I was sitting in the car with my aunt, and it was like the man had a shark's eyes. I went to the courthouse as soon as I could, and was terrified that they wouldn't believe me, despite the texts and witness testimony. I filled out the appropriate forms and then went to speak in front of the judge. I watched other people go up, give their stories, and quite a few were sent home empty-handed. The judge was as cold as ice, and I was so terrified. I pride myself on keeping my composure, but when I went up there and began speaking, I just burst into tears. I didn't feel safe in my own home. I didn't feel safe in my own town. He was so quiet when he moved, you see, that I had never heard him sneaking up behind me. My sleep was plagued with nightmares, where he bashed my brains in with a brick paver from the garden. To my surprise, the judge's demeanor changed. He issued an emergency restraining order, and then and there told me to come back the next week for a more permanent one. He didn't even ask to see the texts. Tommy never even showed up to defend himself. He wasn't allowed anywhere near me, and the cops checked up on me from time to time, which was extremely nice and comforting. I grew comfortable again, but it took a long time. Summer came again, and Boss Dragon called to ask if I would work. The thing was, she wouldn't fire Tommy. When she eventually fired him, I still said no thanks, told her to eat a bag of dicks, and later learned that he had pulled the same shit on an employee years before, and she had done nothing. When Boss Dragon eventually abandoned him, my aunt, boyfriend, and I grew close to her ex-husband, and he told us that his wife had never even told him about what was going on. Since the Rose Farm was her baby, and he was a doctor with insane hours, Steve had no real way of knowing. We didn't talk to him, rarely saw him when we worked there. He was absolutely mortified and apologetic. With Tommy gone, he surprisingly stuck to the rules of the restraining order. We worked for the ex-husband for a year to help him close the Rose Farm down. I also found out that Tommy had gotten in trouble in West Virginia for sexual assault, and that was why he had moved down here. So here's to you, Tommy, you fucking creep. Let us never meet again. Edit. I forgot to add something. The reason we thought he had listened to lug nuts was because I ended up with a flat tire at the Rose Farm. Next day, Tommy rolls a new tire up. I didn't accept it as I hardly knew him, and it was just strange regardless. Bought a new tire and had it put on with an air wrench. That was the wheel that popped off. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 260. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, I'm still feeling like the poops, so I'm going to keep this outro short. I'm not sure what I'm doing tomorrow. Hopefully I'll have something up. I think I've got a glitch story, so I'll try and do a glitch video. If I'm not in the mood, then I'll probably just do 3 scary stories again. But hopefully I'll have something up. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.